Welcome, everybody. Kitzur
Good
Shulchan Aruch,
afternoon.
the Abridged Code of Jewish Law, chapter 94, and we're up to number 3. So, all right, we're going to start with a brief review. So, the Torah tells us that we cannot do malacha on Shabbos. The Torah does not define malacha, what malacha means, all right? At least not directly. Doesn't tell us openly, open definition. But we're not allowed to do malacha. Now, in the middle, more than once actually, but in the middle of building the Mishkan, we are told to keep Shabbos. And this is for 2 reasons. Number one, to tell us that as important as building the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the desert is, we can't build on Shabbos. It doesn't overrule Shabbos. But number 2, we also have the term malacha used to describe the creative techniques that they used to build the Mishkan, and to tell us that these words have the same definition. So the malacha, the work, for lack of better translation, that we cannot do on Shabbos, are the 39 creative activities that they used to build the Mishkan. So the difficulty, the degree of difficulty of the work is irrelevant. How strenuous it is irrelevant. It's whether it's one of these 39 creative activities. So one of the things that they did is they transported materials in a Reshus HaRabim that we're going to loosely translate as a public domain. And again, as we said last week, it can be privately owned, but essentially public means that it's public thoroughfare. It's 16 amos wide at least, which is it's about 8 meters. I don't know what that is in feet. It was about 1.5 feet to an amma, so I guess about 24 feet. Then we
36 to 48 feet.
36 to 16.
You said 24 amma. And
no,
amma
16 ammas.
Oh,
16 amos is about 32 feet.
24 to 32 feet,
yeah,
depending upon how you measure.
Yeah, about 24 feet. It's about 1.5 feet approximately. Is an amma, and then we see. I don't work in feet, unfortunately. Well, we'll get there. I sometimes work with my feet, but don't measure in feet. So anyway, it has to have a large, according to most views, 600,000 people travel on per day, or possibly even at a time. And there's some other criterion that we mentioned that's not fenced in. So all of these make a public domain. And they transported the materials in the public domain. So we are not allowed to transport, we can't carry things. And the definition of that is 4 amos, which is about 6 feet. We can't carry things that distance in a public domain on Shabbos. As well as that, they brought things from the public domain into the private domain, which was the Mishkan, and they also brought things from their home, which is the private domain, into the public domain when they transported these goods. So there's 2 things here. One is we can't carry or transport or cause to move, can't even throw. We can't move objects 4 amos, approximately 6 feet, in the public domain, and we can't transfer from a private domain to a public domain, or vice versa. Right, so that's the biblical prohibitions. As we mentioned last week, besides the private domain and the public domain, there's another 2 domains. One's called a Carmelis, one's called a Mokum Patur, We're going to forget about the Mokum Patur for this chapter. But the Carmelis is essentially a public domain that's missing some of the criteria. So it's biblically you could carry there, but because it's similar to a public domain, the sages, and we're talking about when we say the sages already in the times of the prophets, made a decree that we can't carry in this de facto, this private domain, this Carmelis, this rabbinic public domain, rabbinic public domain, and we can't transfer from a private domain to this rabbinic public domain or vice versa. So we end up, although in theory we should be talking about three: the private domain, the public domain, and the Carmelis, but we're calling this Carmelis a public domain for all essential purposes. Okay. So anything that is not a private domain, essentially we can't carry. So we then take it a slight step further. And we were discussing last week about courtyards. So courtyards can be literally a shared courtyard between homes, but even let's say it means any common area in an apartment building, in a fenced, housing sort of a group of townhouses, an estate, there's complexes. They have any of these things where there's common area. That common area, even though essentially it's, technically it's privately owned, it's fenced in and it's privately owned, but it's shared. It's probably owned by the owners, each one having a share in it. All right, so let's say there's 10 apartments in the building. So even though in a certain respect it's private domain, but since it's owned by these 10 people, we're concerned that people will get confused. And since they can carry in a semi-public area outside of the home, in this, the grounds of the townhouses, for example, they will then become confused and think they can keep carrying in the street, which is potentially a real public area, public domain. And therefore, in order to carry there, you have to make an Erev. And an Erev means that essentially they make it to like one property with a common kitchen. So we mentioned last week, they have courtyards. So let's say all of us, instead of being virtually, each one having a little box on the screen, let's say this was actually a housing complex, and each little box is our home, and the black around the box and between the boxes are the streets and the courtyard and various things. So in order to be able to carry in the common areas or to carry from each of our houses to other houses, we create an Erev which turns the whole area into one large house. And this part of the Erev has to be fenced in, to be one large house. And we all chip in for food, or could be just I buy the food, but I give you a share in it, some ownership in it. Doesn't matter how it's done, as long as we all partly own the food. And the food gets stored somewhere in our area that we can have access to. And this becomes our shared kitchen. And we're like one big house with a shared kitchen. And therefore, we're carrying now in one house and not outside, even though it happens to be outside. Okay, any questions on that? Anything wasn't clear before we go further? Okay. So, also last week, and I just mentioned it because we're going to build on it this week, we mentioned that not only one courtyard can all join in to make an Erev. If you have two adjoining courtyards, and there's a gate in between. It doesn't have to be a gate, it just has to be some type of opening that someone could crawl through. But let's just keep it simple. There's a gate in between. So we have our courtyard, and again, let's pretend our screen here, each person's individual screen is their house, and all the black between the squares and around it is the courtyard, the shared area. So and next door, there's another one exactly the same with a gate in between. So we have two choices. Choice number one is each courtyard can make their own Erev. That allows us to carry in our courtyard between our houses, but we cannot carry to and from the courtyard next door. But since we have an opening, if we wish, we can make a combined Erev. And this then not only lets us carry between our homes and in our common area, we can even carry next door and to their houses and vice versa, because we become one large home. And this is really what a city Erev is, just on a larger scale. Let's not talk about how it's fenced in. That's a separate issue, which we're not discussing today. But the concept of we all make one big courtyard, and you rent the public areas, the streets, the parks, various things from the city. It's normally a token amount. They're quite happy to help. And all the public area becomes like one big home with all the other homes. And in a shul, normally a shul, but in some communal building somewhere, there's food that's part of the Erev, and everyone is allowed to come and eat it if they like. Okay.
Rabbi, a question?
Yeah.
So like, for instance, we have 17 people and I see their boxes. So the question is, do you only need the approval for the Erev of the people on the perimeter, on the outside of the whole thing? Or do you also include the people on the inside? In other words, like, what if they don't want to be included, or what if they're not included? Are they automatically included because they're inside the perimeter?
So it depends. So let's pretend this is an apartment building. The apartment building, we need everyone to join in, or they have to give up their rights in the common area. Right? If they insist on keeping their rights in the shared areas and don't join in, then we can't make the Erev. So let's say everyone made an Erev except me. I don't want to join in. If I give up my share, then I can't carry from my house to outside. I'm stuck, but I've given up my share in the public areas. So everyone else can make an Erev and they can carry to and from the public area in each other's house. I'm the only one who's stuck. I can't carry things in and out of my house. And even the people who can carry, because they're part of it, cannot bring things into my house. So that's in a courtyard. When it comes to a city Erev, so although in theory, every resident of the city, they pay their taxes to the city, so they're all shared owners, but the city is like the representative, the government, the mayor and all the whoever it is. So they're like fill the place of the owner. So if we make an arrangement with them, as the city is the one who has control over the streets, they can close it, they can open it, the parks, they can lease things out. So as they're the administrators, if we make the arrangement with them, it's irrelevant if an individual house doesn't want to join. So an individual house doesn't want to join in, that would be the same as me. If we just had a courtyard and I gave up my rights in the shared area because the city's given over the shared area. So that person isn't part of the Erev. But if the city has leased out the common, all the public areas of the city, the streets, the parks, whatever happens to be, the walkways, sidewalks, then all of that is part of the Erev, and all those who joined in can carry from their house to outside and to each other. If there's someone who particularly did not want to be part of the Erev, he's stuck, he can't use it. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So in number 3, before we get started, instead of 2 adjoining courtyards that both open to the street, we're going to have it slightly differently. We have 2 adjoining courtyards. So you have the street. Off the street comes a courtyard, and off that courtyard is another courtyard. So the inner courtyard can only access the street through going through the other courtyard. Does everyone picture that? Yeah. So you got a street, a courtyard with a gate into another courtyard. So the second courtyard has to go through the first one to go in and out, to go to the street. Okay. All right, so that's the situation we're speaking about. Number 3, Gimel. You got 2 courtyards. One is inside the other. When we say inside, we don't necessarily mean surrounded, but it's further away from the road. It's inside relative to the road. Now, the inner courtyard does not have its own access to the street. You have to go through the other courtyard to get to the street. There's a gate between the 2 courtyards. And therefore, to get to the street, if you want to go to the street, you have to go through this gate into the other courtyard and then go to the street. So if they want, they can make one joint Erev. Let's just keep it simple. Let's just say there's 2 houses in each courtyard. It could be different amounts in each courtyard, and there could be 1,000 houses, between them. Whatever happens to be. We'll just give simple example. The courtyard that adjoins the street has 2 houses, and through walking through this courtyard, you go through a gate, and there's another courtyard, and they have 2 houses. And this inner courtyard can only access the street via going through the other courtyard. There's a gate in between, so similar to the previous halacha. Since they have a gate in between, if they want, they can make one joint Erev if they wish. Now, if they did make a joint Erev, then it's like all one big house. All 4 people can carry in both courtyards, and from one house to another house and various things becomes like one big property. If they don't make a joint Erev, so one courtyard makes its Erev and the other courtyard makes its own Erev. So, or let's use, we're going to give another example first. In B'nai Pnimim Levadim Arvu, just the inner courtyard, the one without access to the street, they make an Erev, and the other one didn't. So now what happens? They can carry in their courtyard. So these 2 houses, without access to the street, the inner one, they can carry from their house to the courtyard, from the courtyard to the other guy's house. They have fully functioning Erev, no problem. However, the people on the outside, the courtyard that adjoins the street, they can't carry in the courtyard or to and from the courtyard because they don't have an Erev. That's situation number 1. Let's reverse it. The B'nai Pnimiyim loy arvel. The inner courtyard, the ones without access to the street, did not make an eruv. El benechasayim levadon arvel, just the outer courtyard, the one with access to the street, they made an eruv. Loy mahani lehem eruv, that eruv doesn't help. Okay, so the inner courtyard, the one without access to the street, they can't carry because they didn't make an eruv. The outer one, although they did make an eruv, they have a problem. What's the problem? The problem is the people in the other courtyard who are not allowed to carry on Shabbos, or in this area, because they didn't make an eruv, have foot access. They have the right of access through their courtyard to the street. So it's like they are another resident in the courtyard that was not part of the eruv. So the fact that they have access rights, that they can travel through that courtyard to their own street, it's like they're another resident and they have ruined that eruv by not joining. Is everyone following? Please, if I'm not explaining well enough, please ask. Right, so because these people,
it could be a silly question, but
yeah,
it could be a silly question, but when you're saying eruv, I'm not totally sure. Is it the same as the gate or not?
Okay, so the eruv means they're combined into one joint property. So it has to be fenced in somehow.
But as a constructional, if you will look at that, it looks exactly as the gate or not?
It doesn't have to be a gate. So let's leave the construction aside. Let's just keep it simple. And let's say these courtyards have a regular fence. Okay, It doesn't have to be a regular fence, but we'll keep our example simple. They both have fully fenced in courtyards with two houses in the courtyard. There's a proper gate in between, and there's a gate from the one courtyard to the street.
That's so it's basically, it could be like an arc. Let's see, it's Triumph Arc in Paris. That's how it has to be, just something that you go in and out through, or it can be an arc, or it has to be a complete gate that is connected.
So it doesn't have to be a complete gate, but that's not what it's us now. We're going to get to further how to construct it, if we have gaps.
Okay.
So in concept, it's fenced in, but how we fence it in, there's different ways to do it. But now we're discussing where does it work.
Sure. I understand that. I try to understand exactly what is the subject.
So again, let's keep this. Let's use these examples simple and say that each courtyard is properly, fenced in with a regular fence, like a home's backyard. Just instead of one house sharing this yard, there's two. So they made an eruv, and on their back gate opens to another courtyard, which is also properly fenced in with two houses. And again, doesn't have to be two, just keeping it simple. And that inner courtyard has right of access to walk or travel through the outer one to get to the street. Yeah. Ezra, yeah.
So this second courtyard, the internal one, if they were to give up their rights to the other two, then the outside courtyard could then operate as if the others didn't exist.
Correct. So if they decide they're not going to leave their property the whole Shabbos, right? Because even if they say they're giving up, the second they walk through, take advantage of their access rights, they've taken it back. But in concept, yes, if they decide that's it, we're going to isolation the Shabbos, right? We're quarantining. That's it. We're closing the gate. It's all yours. then if that outer courtyard, the one near the street, makes an Eruv, they're fine.
Okay.
Robert, yeah.
Yes, I'm confused or interested that, when we do an Erev around a community, we use a line from post to post, but that's not applicable in this particular making an Erev.
Well, it could have been. I mean, that could be how they did it. When we make the lines post to post, we're making door frames, the shape of door frames.
Okay.
And we're allowed to make multiple door frames to make the fence. Now that's a leniency that we have because it's not a biblical public domain. It's really this Carmelis, which is a rabbinic public domain. So we have a lot of leniencies of how we can close it in. But in order to make this Erev, it has to be closed in. Whether it's a more sort of symbolic closure that we have in this rabbinic area, or whether it's a real fence, that's irrelevant for these laws. I mean, it has to be closed in somehow. But for these laws, it's closing. We're actually talking about making the Erev, not the structure, but the Erev of everyone joining together to make it the common property, the one home. So if the outer Erev, in other words, the one near the street, makes an Erev, the inner one does not, the inner one ruins the outer Erev's Erev, because since they have right of access and they can't carry on in the courtyard on Shabbos, they ruin it. They're like a resident that didn't join in. Now, this is only if the inner residents did not make their own Erev. Because since they made each other forbidden to go take things in and out of their home and to carry in the Erev in their own courtyard, the Havila regular Surubim Koima, they are, literally, they're a foot that's forbidden in its own place. In other words, since Erev doesn't apply to them this Shabbos because they didn't make one, that people who can't carry, but regular Surubim Koima or Suragama Makim Acha. So such a person, if they have rights to another area, they carry their status over to the other area, and therefore they ruin the other person's Erev. However, if you had two separate Erevs, the outer courtyard and the inner courtyard, each one made their own Erev. Therefore, these people in the inner courtyard, the one away from the road, they're allowed to carry in their place, in their courtyard. So they are a place they are a foot, so to speak, that's permissible to carry in its area. And they don't affect the outer one. It's the fact that they walk through without having housing rights doesn't affect the outer one. Right, does everyone understand that differentiation, the difference between the two? Yeah, okay. So this inner courtyard, if they are allowed to carry in their place, and it's just an access, just like a walking access through the other courtyards of the street, they don't affect it because they're not residents. They just have walking rights. However, if they did not make an Erev themselves, so they're forbidden to carry in their own place, then they've got two things going. It's the access and their forbidden status comes across. And therefore they ruin the other, they ruin the Erev in the other courtyard. Now, similar to this, likewise, let's change the situation slightly, the scenario. So the outer courtyard, the one with access to the street, still has two residents. It can be more than two. We're just making an example of two. The inner courtyard, the one who has to travel through the first one to get to and from the street, instead of it being a shared courtyard, there's just one person lives there. It's me, and the courtyard is my front and backyard. That's it. It's my property. So I don't need to make an Erev, because what does an Erev do? Makes it one joined property. But it's my house. I'm the only one who lives there. It's my joint property already. So I don't need to make an Erev for me to be the carry in my own property. I can just carry automatically. So if there's only one Jew in a courtyard, and also Mekoimos, so he's not forbidden to carry in his place, he can carry in his yard. But the same thing, the fact that he has access rights through the other courtyard to get to the street, he doesn't affect the status of the Erev of the other courtyard. But if there were two residents or more, and they didn't make an Erev, then even if we reverse it, right? So now the inner one, the one away from the street, has two or more residents, and the outer one, the one that adjoins the street, only has one resident, they still mess it up for him. Even though he doesn't need an Erev, but they still cause him not to be able to carry, given the Havi Lo Regel V'Sura Mekoma, because they are people who can't carry, and they have access rights through his property, and therefore they make even this individual in his own individually owned property unable to carry to and from the yard to his house and in the yard.
Rabbi, a question?
Yes.
What if the outer courtyard is there, but the inner courtyard doesn't have people there, but let's say it's a government building?
So begun building or a store or anything like that, it's going to be the same thing if they have access to it on Shabbos. So, if they only have access on 3 days a week and it's not Shabbos, or you can have someone who lives there and they've gone away for Shabbos, therefore has to be a Jewish person went away for Shabbos. Non-Jewish person might drive back or fly back on Shabbos, but the Jewish person isn't going to. So if there's some reason that the access doesn't exist this week, then they're irrelevant. But once they have access, it doesn't matter whether it's people actually living there or if they just use it for storage. Unless, like we said before, unless they give up their rights. Because once they have the access to go through, even if they're not there, if they could come on Shabbos, then it's the same as if they are there.
So if it's not a private residence, but it's, let's say, a government post office, and it's closed or open, I don't know, but does that play any part? Like instead of houses in the inner courtyard, it's a building.
Well, it's going to be the same thing, because the whoever's there still has the rights to walk through the outer courtyard. They have that ability to come through at any time. So it doesn't matter who owns it, whether it's one person, two people, a government, a company. It's still it's the fact that they have the access rights. Therefore, their status can affect the other one.
I understand.
Yeah. All right. So again, just to summarize it, was a bit complicated because we had different situations. To summarize, if we have two courtyards, an outer courtyard that has access to the road, and through that courtyard, from the road, you walk through that courtyard, there's a gate and there's access to an inner courtyard inside that one. So there's a few options, a few things they can do. Number one is they can make one big Erev together. And that's probably the best thing to do, because now they can carry to and from both courtyards. If just the inner courtyard makes an Erev, they can carry, they're not affected by the outer courtyard because the outer courtyard doesn't have access. I mean, there's a gate, but it's just like the front door of your house. People can't walk in whenever they want. They have no right of access. So that the courtyard between the street and the inner courtyard becomes irrelevant to the inner courtyard if they make an Erev, just themselves. So they can carry there, but no one can carry in the outer one because there's no Erev. If the outer courtyard made an Erev, now it depends. So if they made two separate Erevs, outer courtyard made theirs, the inner courtyard made theirs, each one can carry in their courtyard. And even though the inner courtyard has right of access, but since they are people who can carry in their courtyard, they can't, although they can't carry in the outer courtyard, but they don't mess up the Erev for the outer courtyard. The outer courtyard can still carry, even though they have right of access. If, however, the inner courtyard did not make an Erev, and those are people who are forbidden to carry in courtyards and Shabbos, then their right of access carries their forbiddenness, if that's not quite the right word, but for lack of a better word in English, into the outer courtyard and messes
prohibitions.
Yeah. Okay. So they take their status follows them, their right of access into the outer courtyard, and means that the outer courtyard's Erev is messed up as well. Okay. Questions, comments? Everyone's very quiet today. It's getting me worried.
Everybody's a Bucky.
Oh, Hashem. Okay. So Dalit. Yes.
Could you just repeat that last thing? If the inner courtyard does not make the Eruv and the outer courtyard does, what is the situation there?
So the inner courtyard did not make an Eruv, so they can't carry. And since they have right of access, through the outer one, they can walk through the outer one. When their right of access extends their right of access extends their inability to carry into the outer courtyard. So it means the outer courtyard can't carry either. Is that clear now, or not clear yet? Okay. You can unmute if you need to ask. All right. Okay.
How?
Yeah. What's the question? So I broke up. I didn't hear you.
Hello?
Yes. It's breaking up. Can't
what about the family members? What about if it is wife and children?
Okay,
yeah,
so in your own house.
I have a really difficult connection. I want to.
Okay, so I'll answer what I think you said. And if it's the right answer, good. You give me a thumbs up. And if not, we'll try again. So family members in one property. So they don't need to make an Erev if they all eat together. So that's, the most simple example is that, everyone lives in the one house and then you not see an Erev makes artificially, we have a shared kitchen and a common food. So we turn into one house. If you're living in one house and you really do have the shared kitchen, even if the teenagers have the little room with their own kitchenette or something, that's still the main meals, or they have access at least to the main kitchen, then it really is one property. The Eruv just makes it like that. And this would even apply, you know, sometimes, let's say like a campsite. You know, campsite, you know, you can have 200 kids and, you know, 20, 30 different bunkhouses, and you got all the staff accommodations, but everyone comes and eats in the dining room. You know, so even though they might have snacks in their suitcases and different things, but there's one main kitchen where people have access to the food there. So they can make the Eruv very easily. Right.
And by carrying, you mean just the particle, just parts of their meal. Don't mean that they're not
carrying anything.
But what about walking just empty-handed?
Right, so walking empty-handed.
They're allowed.
Yeah, so you're allowed to walk, yeah. So you can walk. Now, there's a distance outside the city limits when there's no more houses, how far you can go. But let's say within the city or within a property or through the streets, you can walk as far as you wish on Shabbos.
Okay.
Which in Phoenix, when it gets 120 degrees in the summer, is not very far.
Thank you. Thank you.
No problems. Okay. So number 4, we're going to change the scenario slightly. Instead of having 2 adjoining courtyards, it's going to be sort of picture a motel, like a 2-story motel. But instead of the motel being owned by one person, he rents out the rooms. Each little room is each person's own house. And it could be the multiple rooms, but whatever it is. So you have a group of houses that have access, the front doors access from the street level, ground level. And then you have a stairs or a ladder, doesn't matter. And then you have this sort of porch walkway. And the porch walkway, there's another, however many houses have access from the porch. That's how you get entry into the house. So we are going to say this is the same as having the 2 courtyards, the outer and inner. So except it's the downstairs is like the outer courtyard, because their courtyard, their common area. So only the downstairs homes own the common area on the ground level. And they're the ones with access to the street. The people who live upstairs, their common area is the porch and perhaps the ladder. They don't have a share in the downstairs. Right? Most apartment buildings today, doesn't matter what floor you're on, you know, you own the garden and the swimming pool, if there's a swimming pool, and every hallway and every floor, you know, everything's common area. But that's not how this setup was. This setup, you know, like I said, picture the 2-story motel, but instead of being a motel, it's owned by one person. Each person owns their own little apartment. And the upstairs people, their common area is the porch and the stairs. And the downstairs people, the grounds, the actual courtyard is their common area. And they're the ones that access to the street. And so though it's upstairs, downstairs, it's the same concept as the outer courtyard and inner courtyard. Right? Is the scenario clear? Yeah, okay. So Dalit, number 4. Batim abnuyim baliyah. You have these houses and they're built on the upper level. Lefneihem marpeses, and in front of them, in other words, in front of each door, there's this marpeses, this balcony. Shememeno yoidim memedregas, and it's through this balcony they access the stairs, the taike chotza, and they go from there into the ground floor courtyard. And the chotza, and it's from this ground floor courtyard, the Rosh Hashanah, they have access to the outside, to the street. Their status is exactly the same as the 2 courtyards, one inside the other. The porch, the upstairs balcony, is like the inner courtyard. So it comes the same thing. They can make one big Eruv together. They can make 2 separate ones, in which case each one can carry in their common area. If just the upstairs makes an Eruv, they can carry on the upstairs, but no one can carry downstairs. If only the downstairs makes an Eruv, and the upstairs didn't, then since the upstairs are people forbidden to carry in a shared area on Shabbos, and they have right of access through, they don't have ownership of it, but they have right of access through the downstairs courtyard, they mess up the downstairs courtyard's Eruv. Exactly the same, exactly parallel to the outer and inner courtyard, just one's up and one's down. Are we good? Confused? We're confused or we? No, Baruch Hashem. Okay. Hey, number 5. So now we're going to speak about a house that's divided in 2. It's one house that's been divided. Now, many years ago, when my son, who's 25, was about 1, so my wife used to make kosher meals on wheels. And she was a rabbi in the community, and my wife used to make these meals. And my little son and I, we would go deliver them to people who are homebound or in hospital and different things. So there was these 2 elderly brothers, and they had this big house, and they literally just put a wall down the middle. So you'd open the front door, and there was a wall in the middle of the door, came right to the door, and you had to sort of like stand sideways to get through, because it was just a regular size door frame with a wall in the middle, and each one had their own house on their side of the wall. Right? So it doesn't have to be exactly like that, but this is the type of thing that we're speaking about. You know, a house divided up. Now, a few other scenarios just that they're going to play out. Not always is a house divided up with actual wall down the middle. It's a little unusual, but let's say, for an example, you know, people who share a house or share an apartment. You know, sometimes college students or young professionals, or sometimes you know, whatever it is. Sometimes the older people, the widowers, and whatever it is they want to have. You know, it's easier to share a place. So there's different levels of shared apartment, right? You have on the one extreme, similar to how family is. That's really just one family living in a house. You know, I've got my bedroom, someone else has a different bedroom, but we're all one house. That's sort of one extreme. Then you have sometimes, you know, although we officially share this house, this is my room and you can't come in. You know, if not for the fact that I share an apartment with you, I don't even know you. You know, I've got nothing to do with you. Just, I mean, not me and you, God forbid, but you know, whoever's the people, the only common factor they have. So even though it's the one house, and maybe they have a shared lease, but practically speaking, each one has their own home within this house. So it's going to make a difference as to whether you need to make an Eruv or not. So if it's the extreme of when it's like my family, and although different members of the family have their own bedroom, but we're one family, one house, one kitchen, everything together, it's one home. So we don't need to make an Eruv. But if it's the other extreme, and we can have everything in between, different levels in between, but other extreme, where you have people, they're sharing this property together, but they have nothing to do with each other. Let's keep it simple that they don't share food. I have my food, you have your food. We, you know, except to divide the bills, we have nothing to do with each other. Then in order to carry even in this house on Shabbos, they have to make an Eruv. And we can have different levels of that in between. Okay, did I explain clearly the difference? Yep. All right. So, hey, number 5. A house that has 2 apartments, or, you know, it's been divided. So it can be divided. Like I said, these brothers had a wall straight down the middle, or however they divided. I've got my room, you got your room. The Hainel, so he's giving an example. It doesn't have to be this case. He's giving an example. You've got you open the front door, and there's like a little lobby. It doesn't have a lobby, a little entrance room, whatever it is, the foyer. and from the foyer, there's a door to my house, and the other door goes to someone else's house. So that's one way. And there's two different homeowners, right? No, it's not one family, two different households, or even if they're singles, whatever it is, live in each house. You know, we don't share anything. We share the lobby maybe, but we don't share anything else. So therefore, asurim l'hoitzi afilu b'bayis leprusta. You can't even carry from the house to the lobby without making an eruv. Right? I can do whatever I want in my house, but even the lobby already, it's like a courtyard. It's the same thing as the shared area. Without an eruv, I can't carry there, or to and from there. Even if you got one room, right? So one room house, and we divided it into two rooms. The Darim Shnayim and two different households live in there. You know, this, you know, you often read this in some of the biographies of people in the war years. And they, you know, refugees came, you had several families living in one house or one apartment. And they put makeshift walls or partitions, and each one had their own living space. So even though it's the one house, it's the same concept. Now, now even though the inner room, even if the only exit is to go through the outer house, right? In other words, not like the example I gave with a lobby with two entrances. Let's say one house comes off the other house, right? I have to walk through your house to get to my house. Mikal Mokim, nevertheless, Surim Nataltal Afilim Cheda Lecheda Achiasa Erev. Any of these situations, you can't carry from room to room. In other words, from one family's living space to another family's living space, unless you make an Erev. Even though technically it's the one house. Now in the brackets, it just says, let's say the house is actually owned by one person. All right, so this would be slightly different. Instead of just people now being housemates, one person owns the house and he rents out rooms, but he's in charge. Okay, and then it doesn't tell you the law here. It tells you several places in the big Shulchan Aruch where to look it up, because I gave you two extreme examples. I gave you the family on one side that shares everything, just happens to be have their own rooms, and then the people have nothing to do with each other on the other extreme, and we can have multiple levels in between that. So exactly where we draw the line, that's someone is in that situation, they probably need to ask their rabbi exactly what they're going to do based on their own specific circumstances, because it can change. But this is the concept. All right. Now, number 6 that we probably won't get a chance to actually do today, but we'll start the introduction, is how do we make an Erev? Right? How do we make an Erev? And we don't mean how to make the structure. We mean how do we make it that everyone has a share in the, make it to one house, and everyone has a shared kitchen, so to speak. And we're going to go through the procedure. But what we'll do is probably stop there, but just to mention next week, I know we mentioned it briefly when I think we had 6 people on, but now that pretty much everyone's on. So next week, from Tuesday to Tuesday, except Sunday, from Tuesday to Tuesday, I'm going to take the morning class in place of Rabbi Smith for a week. We're going to study the Megillah with commentaries, and I'm sure you will find at least details of the story, not how it's presented to you when you as kids and different things. For an example, Esther was not an attractive looking woman. She actually had a greenish hue to her skin. But miraculously, whoever looked at her, whatever they envisioned in their mind was the most beautiful thing. That's what they saw. So you could have two people looking at her, and one person seeing a tall, thin blonde, and the other person seeing, Mediterranean looking, with a whole different olive, or someone else is looking and they're seeing an African. Whatever they thought in their mind was the most beautiful woman, that's what they saw. While she herself was not a physically attractive looking person at all. So
well,
things like that.
75. So,
Yeah, all right. She was doing well for age. Okay, good point. But that's what they saw. So lots of things we'll learn, God willing. But the catch is 10 o'clock Eastern time is 8 o'clock here. And my shul on the Rabbi, we daven at 7. And particularly Mondays and Thursdays, we're only sort of done just before 8. So someone else is going to log on. One of my kids are going to log on. I'll start admitting people, but it's possible that I might be a minute or two late. So please have patience for me.
Patience.
But don't come late just in case I'm on time. All right. So with that,
have a great show.
I'm sorry I was late today. My son had me on the telephone.
That's okay. Children are important.
So Esther was like the mun. It changed to whatever the person wanted to taste like.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't say Aman and Esther are the same sentence.
The mun.
Well, we do. But many years ago, quite a few years ago, 20 years ago, whatever, I was reading the Torah on Shabbos, and we said Hamon, meaning the manna.
Right.
And one of the people in the shul started to boo. Not to be funny, they got confused. They thought it was Haman.
It's a good thing you didn't have a Gregor.
That's it. Especially on Shabbos, that wouldn't have been good. But anyway, wish everyone a wonderful week, a wonderful Shabbos. And
have a great Shabbos.
So you should have a blessed month.
Thank you. See you next
Tuesday
week.
morning, God willing.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Shabbos.
Rabbi.
Bye-bye.